All right. I'm going to give Scott Thompson about 5 minutes to get his food ate over there, and then we're going to do a little different thing. And as we have been teaching for a long time, a lot of people are starting to grasp things. And so Scott is into the sales tax, and he's going to tell you some things about the sales tax, and then we'll give him about 10 minutes or 15. And anyway, he said he didn't know why I did that to him. But anyway, I wanted to start off, says, order in the court. Why lawyers should never ask a witness a question if they aren't prepared for the answer. A southern small-town prosecuting attorney called his first witness to the stand, a grandmotherly elderly woman. He approached her and asked, "Miss Jones, do you know me?" She responded, "Why, yes, I do know you, Mr. Rogers. I've known you since you were a young boy, and frankly, you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, you manipulate people and talk about them behind their back. You think you're a big shot when you haven't the brains to realize you never will amount to anything more than a two-bit paper pusher. Yes, I know you." The lawyer was stunned. Not knowing what else to do, he pointed across the room and asked, "Miss Jones, do you know the defense attorney?" She again replied, "Well, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a youngster, too. He's lazy, bigoted, and he has a drinking problem. He can't build a normal relationship with anyone, and his law practice is one of the worst in the entire state. Not to mention he cheated on his wife with 3 different women. Yes, I know him." The defense attorney almost died. At this point, the judge brought the courtroom to silence, called both counselors to the bench, and in a very quiet voice said, "If either of you 2 guys ask her if she knows me, you'll be jailed for contempt." And this one I thought was kind of amusing. It says, "Where did the white man go wrong?" That an old Indian chief sat in his hut on the reservation smoking a ceremonial pipe and eyeing 2 U.S. government officials sent to interview him. Chief Two Eagles asked one of the officials, "You have observed the white man for 90 years. You've seen his wars and his material wealth. You've seen his progress and the damage he's done." The chief nodded in agreement. The official continued, "Considering all of these events, in your opinion, where did the white man go wrong?" The chief stared at the government official for over a minute and then calmly replied, "When white men found the land, Indians were running it. No taxes, no debt, plenty of buffalo, plenty of beaver, women did all the work, medicine man free, Indian man spent all day hunting and fishing and all night having sex." Then the chief leaned back and smiled. White man dumb enough to think he can improve on that system. So we're going to have a lot of things now starting to come in about people who are using this all over the country, what we've been talking about. What I gave you was the bond, and you should be able to use this bond with all the clarification of it and everything. And it's really written like a check, and this is what was advised. So as we get into these things, as I tell people, I have a lot of people that'll email me, and they're, they don't do this, they don't do that, and so I tell them that it really isn't what I'm about. What we're here to learn is who you are. What we've been done is dumbed down to the point that we don't understand who we are. That we really are the kings and queens of the world. It is really that simple. We've lost that, and you say, well, back in so-and-so, every time we talk about this, you can go back in history and pinpoint where all of this started. But you always have to ask the question, how could they do it? And the answer is they couldn't. They just put it out there. And we sat there and did nothing about it. They cannot change anything from the way the country was set up, either Texas or the United States. They cannot change it. They can put it on paper, but it still doesn't change. And the reason you know that is they have to get your permission in everything you do. And that tells you, you know, they can say, well, we set up this out from under the Constitution. Who gave them the authority to do that? Did any of y'all? Did any of us? No. So they just took the authority because things were in a quandary, and they decided that this is the way they're going to do it. And we haven't said anything. But the problems that are going on all over the country, it is, you know, you talk about Oregon, you talk about Washington, and all these other different states, and they all have the same problems. And they're trying to head the people down the same path. The issue is, who are you? Were you born a slave? Or were you born a free man? All men are born free. Just some people convince others that they ought to work for them, they ought to do give them all their labor, and they'll give them just a little bit, enough to survive. And here we go. They become rich in goods, and the slave then toils and finally dies. But in all of this, you have to understand who you are. No one was put here to gain control over another person. You are that way. And when you realize it, what you say is what it is. What really happened in the system we're in is that in 1933, we lost our title. Everything is determined by title. Everybody rules by title. The king rules by title. So every little child that's born, he's born a king. But in this country, in 1933, they take that away from you. They put this birth certificate out, and they entitle themselves to now represent you all of your life if you don't, at the age of 21, say enough's enough. You see, you're the one that has the title of sovereign. What they do is entitle themselves to the name sovereign, and they're going to represent you. And they're going to represent you in court. And they're going to represent you down at City Hall. They're going to represent you in everything you do. And we sit here and say, well, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. And the issue is, what makes a man become meaner and meaner is because he gets his rights taken away from him. And he doesn't know anything else. So a free man, if you totally understand that, if you're a free man and you let everybody else live their life and quit trying to live theirs and just live yours, you all of a sudden realize how much fun it is to live. The problem is that we get into this thing of wanting everybody else to live our lives for us. You know, and we call people my doctor, my lawyer, my preacher, and all of these people are making decisions for us. And there's nobody. All of them are called third parties. From the beginning of time, this is what is wrong with all of us, with the world, is a third party always gets involved in the equation. When the third party gets involved, the two people lose everything they have. People spend their lives working and working and working, and then all of a sudden they have problems. And one of them says, I'm going to get a lawyer. Well, has a lawyer ever been there when you're working? Has he ever produced anything for your family? And the answer is no. But yet, when it happens, people run and get a lawyer. Now, then the other one says, well, if they're going to get a lawyer, I have to get a lawyer. And that's not true. Simply, if one gets a lawyer, the other one says you're fired. There ain't nobody getting into this contract but the ones that made it. But we have this idea that an attorney has a right to get in the middle of everything. A lady was in the federal court the other day. She literally took the court over. And she said she made a mistake right at the end, but she said the attorney was really pouncing on her about it. She turned to him. She said, "Are you trying to represent me? If you are, you're fired." And he just immediately sat down in his chair and didn't say another word. Everybody in the court, she went around and fired him. And she said, "Now I'm leaving." She turned to walk out the door, and all of a sudden the judge spoke up, and he says, "You're not leaving here." Well, there's two marshals standing up by the door, and instead of her turning to the judge and said, "You have nothing to say to me, I fired you, this is my courtroom," she turned around and went back. And he said, "Marshals, get a hold of her and take her out." She had given back what she had spent all this time taken away from her. The issue in all of this is, who are you? What are you going to do when someone wants your rights? And it's all about rights. It's all about venue and jurisdiction. If you can grasp that, if you look at that last 3 pages of the documents I gave you, it's a venue and jurisdiction document. It says that no one. Read it, and it gives you all of the rights. It gives you all the venue and jurisdiction. If you look at the document that I gave you some time ago, it was, I don't think the man's here, but anyway, it was about jurisdiction. And it's a jurisdictional document where it showed exactly how everything was farmed in this country. Everything was farmed, and the people went into a territory, and when they got enough people, they decided, well, they wanted this territory to become a state and to be hooked on to this United States. Well, but the people never were hooked into it. The people always stayed as just people on the land, that they were the inhabitants of the land. They never belonged to taxation, and if you study all these tax ideas, and this is what Scott's going to talk about a little bit in a minute, you'll find out that none of them got their start with the founding of the country. If they weren't here when the country started, you can't add it. You can't take away from it. You cannot go in and start collecting taxes in 1947. You can't go in and start collecting taxes somewhere in 1870, a new tax. What's the newest one was the sales tax. And so Scott's going to come up here, and then I'll get back into talking. He's going to come up here and tell you about the sales tax and what he's learned and some of the experiences. And if any of you want to then get in and study the sales tax issue with him, then you can do so. I was hoping there was another lady supposed to be here, and it's something very interesting that came up. We had the conversation. She was going to come in here and talk also. But it's how you get your property back from them, because they take the title of it, and how you get it back, and it's with documents that has to do with transferring it out of this corporate government into the real government. So anyway, she was in the import-export business, and some things came to light that really are foundational to all this stuff. So I'm going to let Scott talk about 10, 15 minutes, and he's going to tell you about this. Also, the guy on the radio station wanted him to, he said, "I've never had anyone talk about sales tax. So I want him on my program." He says, "Man, you sure got me in a lot of trouble, didn't you?" So now he's got to go. He's got to get there. So here he is.
Yeah, I sent Rice an email today, and I said, "I know why you got me up here speaking. It's payback for all the times I interrupted him when he was speaking." But I did talk to John Bryant today, and I think we've set up a time for this coming Tuesday from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock on his broadcast to discuss the state sales tax amongst other issues. It's my understanding the state sales tax is not even listed in the Texas Constitution. And so if something is not in the Constitution, then of course it's unconstitutional. You know, Constitution only gives the right to whatever specifically defined in the Constitution. And so there's three types of taxes in the Texas Constitution. I realize that by quoting the Texas Constitution, that's a third party because it's their Constitution, the state of Texas, which of course is a foreign corporation. And so just so that you can understand the reference that you need to go by and understand what they're trying to get across and the points they're making, is there's three types of taxes that are mentioned. There's the income tax, which, as for right now, we don't have, thankfully. There's ad valorem tax. Some people may refer to that as the property tax. And then there's what's known as the occupation tax. Well, an occupation tax is a fee levied against someone who is occupying a nation that they are not of origin from. And so, in other words, who would occupy Texas? Well, foreigners would. And so anybody or any entity, a legal entity or a person that comes into Texas and wants to conduct their affairs here has to pay a fee known as the occupation tax. Well, the occupation tax is determined by the gross receipts of the business, and then they take a percentage of that, which, for example, over in Hearst, it's 8.25%. Now, if you think about this, after all the money that you make and whatever taxes you've already paid, now every time that you go, and if anyone in here files and pays income tax, I'm not making a legal determination, of course, but if you were, for example, to pay a third of your income in taxes, and then another 8.25% of whatever's left over, that's a lot more than just 8.25%. You figure it out. It's more than that. But it's a hidden tax. And so foreigners are the ones that are supposed to pay the occupation tax. Now, foreign corporations have to register with the Secretary of State, whereas itinerant salesmen, in other words, traveling salesmen that go door to door like a brush salesman, they have to register in each county that they're going to be doing business in. Now, I just want to quickly tell you a short story that I had with the experience when I called the Texas Comptroller's helpline. I had started in this movement about maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I'm sure all of y'all are aware of a man named Dixon Cannon, and many of you probably know another lunatic named Daniel Shinzing. He wrote a book called Texas is a Liar. It's a very interesting book. And so I was invited to come to Dick's meetings when he was holding them a few years ago, and Daniel came and gave a talk about the state sales tax issue. Well, being in the retail business, it affects me on a daily basis. And so I started listening to what he was saying. I thought, this is something wrong with this picture. And so I decided to go back and start studying the tax code myself. Now, yes, it's a waste of time because it's a third party. But I became very familiar with it. See, this is back when I was still incompetent, okay? And so what I was doing, I was wanting a third party to make a legal determination for me because I was unable to understand what was going on, but it was due to my inexperience and ignorance. Now, to start at the very beginning, though, I opened up a business about nearly 20 years ago. Of course, I went down to the county courthouse, and I talked to a lady down there, I believe named Henderson, and first I went to the bank, of course, wanted to open up a business checking account. Well, guess what they told me? Well, you got to have a DBA certificate, an assumed name certificate known as a DBA, doing business as. You need a business card, and I'm trying to... Well, yeah, a sales permit. No, thank you very much. How could I forget that? Here I am claiming to be competent, but... and so anyway, the bank says we got to have a tax permit number to open up a formal business account. Well, I went down to open up the assumed name certificate, to petition the government to give me this name. Well, my last name you may address me as Thompson, and so I was going to use Thompson in my business name, which I have done that. And so I asked the lady behind the counter, I said, do I have to have an assumed name? She goes, well, no, but if, and anytime you hear those four words in succession, you better realize what you're dealing with is a socialistic public servant that is trying to entice you to volunteer into their jurisdiction. Well, no, but if, for example, you're going to have a conflict with somebody else that's wanting to use the same business name, then this will merely help establish, if you ever have to go to our court, of course, that you've been using the name the longest. Well, what you didn't tell me was the common law rules, and even in the assumed name chapter of the business code, it says in there that the common law is superior to anything else that takes place. And so whether I have an assumed name certificate or not, as long as I've been using my business name before anybody else, it's mine, and I have that right by the common law. And so I took my DBA, I went down and I volunteered into servitude for a sales tax permit number. You know, I want to work for the government for nothing. I want to be a tax collector. Well, of course, the 13th Amendment says that you can't be made to work as a slave involuntarily. Of course, it doesn't say anything about being able to volunteer to be a slave. And so, you know, in my ignorance and incompetence at the time, I went ahead and applied. As you can tell, it must be voluntary if you're going to apply. Of course, they'll tell you it's mandatory, but I'll get to that here in a second. And so I got this sales tax permit and got my business cards, opened up my business, and for 17 years I dutifully collected and remitted back to the state every penny that I ever collected for them. And, yeah, they're willing to pay me 0.5% of the gross if I pay them on time. Do you know if you collect about $10,000 a month, you're making $5 or so to do about 4 hours of bookkeeping work? You know, if you don't have it on computer. And so I was a good slave, and then, of course, I got married, and I asked my wife to be a slave for me and do this for me. She didn't like it, and I don't blame her. I thought it was a pain, too. And so, anyway, after this meeting with Dick Simcannon and Daniel Shinzing, I got to thinking, you know, there's something to this. And so after a couple of years of study and familiarizing myself with the special definitions in statutes, statutory construction, maxims of law, and how to apply these special definitions, I called up the help desk at the comptroller's office, and a young lady named Candy answered the phone. And I asked her, I said, could you help me understand how how I'm liable to be made to collect the state sales tax? And she said, well, you're a retailer, aren't you? I said, well, according to the common everyday meaning of the word retailer, yeah, you could presume that I am one of those, but the word retailer has a special definition. I said, you do understand special definitions, don't you? Well, no, I don't. What are you talking about? Well, have you read the tax code? No. This is the help desk, isn't it? Yes. And you're here to help me, right? Well, yes. What's your question? Well, I want to know how this applies to me. But, you know, the word retailer, and this is just an example of the conundrum that you get into, there's two parts. There's part A, and it says the word retailer is a person, and of course, as you all know, most of you, the word person has a special definition, which means it's a governmental agency, a corporation, a partnership, a trust, an estate, or any type of legal entity, which is a fictitious created entity by the government, okay, like a corporation. Now, whenever you have a special definition, you also have to use a maxim known as e justum generis. That means that all of the definitions in the special definition have to be of the same type. In other words, you can't mix in natural persons or living souls like us with fictional entities like a corporation in the same special definition. Well, why did they give them a special definition? Well, because they don't want you to use the everyday definition of the word. Otherwise, they wouldn't give it a special definition. And you have to use just the special definition. Now, if you don't know the special definition and you read the word person in statute, you think, well, I'm a person, and that must apply to me. But are you a corporation, partnership, trust, estate, governmental agency, or subdivision, or any other legal entity? Well, no. And so these special definitions are hid in the code, and you have to read through the whole thing to find them. And when you do, you may not even understand what you're reading at the time. And so anyway, I'm talking to her about how this applies to me, and I start dragging in the code and the special definition. Look, I'm not an attorney in bankruptcy proceeding according to B1, and according to B2, I don't deal in auctions, and B3, I'm not a traveling salesman, a representative, or a canvasser. B4, I don't buy and sell resell, or I don't buy and resell cable subscription services through motels and hotels. And B5, I don't do mass marketing through flyers, through the mail. Now, I'm not any of B1 through 5, and up here in A it says a retailer is a person, the kind of which you add up the receipts, and that's how you calculate the tax that has to be remitted. I said, I'm not any of those. How am I a retailer? I don't have time to argue with you about special definitions and applicability, and I've got 2 other phone calls to field. I said, no, Candy, before you hang up on me, this is the helpline, right? Well, yes. I said, you are a public servant, right? Yes. Well, guess what that makes me? Oh, I prefer the word master myself. and that's what I told her. I said, that's right, that makes me your master. And boy, you talk about dead silence on the phone. She could not say anything. And I said, Candy, if you've never read the tax code and you don't understand statutory construction and you know nothing of the maxims of statutory construction, how to apply them, and the special definitions and the applicability to correctly construe the liability, you're incompetent for your position. And by the way, this is what I told her back, and this is before I even met RT. I said, you're incompetent for your position. Funny how I used that term 5 years ago, and now we're talking about its competency and incompetence. And so I declared at that time, unknowingly, that she was incompetent for her position. Well, no, I knew it, but I didn't realize what I was doing at the time. There was a reason why that happened. And I said, I tell you what, why don't you put me through to somebody who can and will be able to help me? Yes, sir. And it changed from like, I don't have time to argue this. If you're a retailer, you're collecting the tax, and that's the bottom line, to, yes, sir. But you just have to tell them that. And once you get that across to them, you'd be amazed how much they change their attitude. So anyway, then she puts me down to the attorneys in the tax policy division. This is where they all hide out, and create these occultic practices down in the basement, to enslave us all. So anyway, I got hold of this guy named Kevin, and you can tell he's an attorney. And I said, Kevin, and he's like, what can I do for you? I'm like, well, I'm having difficulty understanding my liability to have to collect the state sales tax. What can I help you with? Well, do you understand statutory construction? Well, yes. Well, of course he does. He writes the stuff. Do you understand special definitions? Oh, yeah. Who do you think came up with them? Do you understand applicability and how determining it may apply to certain, people? Oh, yeah, sure, no problem. What can I do for you? I said, well, I'm trying to understand how I am a retailer according to the special definition of the word retailer in your tax code. He said, I said, in A, it says a person, the kind of which collects, according to the gross receipts, that's how you determine the tax. I said, and down here in B, 1 through 5, and again, I'm not an attorney in bankruptcy, I'm not an auctioneer, I'm not a traveling salesman, I don't sell cable subscription services, I'm not into mass marketing. I said, I'm not any of B1 through 5, and up here in A, I don't understand how that, he goes, well, you're up there in A, that's how that applies to you. I said, how's that? He goes, well, you're a person, aren't you? And I thought for a minute, oh, man, he's got me. I'm a person. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, person has a special definition. Well, by the way, Kevin, I'm not a corporation, a partnership, a trust, an estate, a governmental agency, or subdivision, or any other legal entity. He goes, oh, yeah, you're a legal entity. That's how that statute applies to you. I said, what do you mean I'm a legal entity? A legal entity is something created by the government at the behest and request of the citizen through an application. And so I wasn't created by the government. I was created by a higher authority. How can I be a legal entity? He goes, well, you can sue or be sued, can't you? I said, well, yeah. I guess so. He goes, well, that's it. That's the definition of legal entity. If you can sue or be sued, you're a legal entity. And then I'm like, oh, man, he's got me. Well, what do I do? And, of course, when you're in a situation like this, you really find your faith, where you're coming from. And I'm like, where's my Black's Law Dictionary, Even though it's a fraud, at the time I was using that to help determine some of these definitions. And he told me that I'm a legal entity and I can sue or be sued. I'm flipping through trying to find legal about as fast as I can, and it just nearly opened up right to it. I didn't want too much of a lapse in the conversation with him. And I looked up legal entity, and it said, legal existence as pertains to anything other than a natural person. And boy, after I read that to him, you could just hear him. Boom. I mean, he swallowed hard. And I basically yanked the rug right out from underneath his feet because that was his last straw to make that statute apply to me and convince me that it did apply to me. And that's when he came at me. He said, Mr. Thompson, do you recall the statement you made previously that you thought that any advice that we offered you was going to be biased because our job and duty is to generate and collect additional revenues for the state of Texas? I said, yeah, sure. He goes, well, you were right. You'll never get us to admit that you're not liable to collect the state sales tax. And if you choose to pursue your course of action, we'll fine you $500 a day and sue you in district court. And that's from my public servant.